What I'm sharing this for is to make people aware who know that they have the tendency to just sort of fade away into the background and decide, okay, I'm just going to not communicate anymore, how that can land with the people who are close to them. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back to another episode. I am very, very grateful to be here with you as always, because I understand that it is a gift and a privilege to have my listeners. And without the listeners, there's no podcast. So thank you for joining me this week. I am really eager to talk about this topic today of how harmful silence can be and how this act of ghosting, as it's called, can be very activating for some people's trauma. Now, why am I even bringing this topic up? Well, I actually am bringing it up because of something personal that has happened to me over the years, and that is having people withhold their communication. And so I often talk when I'm speaking in front of rooms, I often talk about the fact that you're always communicating, right? So the communication happens in things that we say and we don't say. It happens in the things that we do and don't do. So the absence of our behavior. It happens in how we listen or how in the absence of our listening. And it happens in the way of being that we are or that we're not. And so everything happens in communication. And so when people withhold their communication, it's called silencing, or oftentimes when one has been communicating and then they suddenly disappear or go MIA or fall off the map, as some people say, then it might be referred to as ghosting. For many people, this can be extremely activating. And so let's talk about that. Why, in fact, when someone doesn't communicate, can that activate a person's trauma? Well, in order to understand that, we need to understand how oftentimes silence is weaponized and how silence can be weaponized and can be used manipulatively in relationships to gain control. And and this is incredibly harmful. And so you may have experienced this before. I can share with you that I have been in relationships where there was a disagreement or a difference of opinion, or where I've even set a boundary. And in response or retaliation, the person actually chose to withdraw their communication completely. And what I mean by that is not only did they not initiate communication, but they also avoided communication, didn't respond to text, or didn't respond to voicemails, or didn't respond to any type of communication, right? As a means to impart a punishment for disagreeing with me, for me setting a boundary. And in one specific relationship, this person didn't speak to me for 6 months. And it was a close family member that didn't speak to me for 6 months because I had set a boundary that they didn't like. And so silence can be used in a weapon as psychological and emotional abuse. And so when well meaning people or people who may just get busy or people who may not know how to set boundaries or say no when they themselves are feeling uncomfortable can inadvertently withhold communication, not understanding or not recognizing how activating that can be for someone who may have experienced that being weaponized against them. Now, I'm not saying that it's necessarily the responsibility of the person who is, withdrawing their communication inadvertently and unaware. What I'm sharing this for is to make people aware who know that they have the tendency to just sort of fade away into the background and decide, okay, I'm just going to not communicate anymore, how that can land with the people who are close to them. Now, of course, there are different circumstances. Sometimes when people are communicating with you in a toxic way, it doesn't warrant a response. We don't always have to respond to toxic communications or harmful communications or overt communications. We don't have to respond to abusive behavior. When we are withholding or withdrawing our communication in that way, it's oftentimes to protect ourselves or to take care of ourselves. And that, in its essence, is not what I'm talking about. Now, even in those cases, you can say, I'm ending the conversation, right? So if I'm on the phone with a person and they begin to talk to me a specific way, rather than just hanging up the phone, I can say, I'm going to hang up now, and then withdraw the communication. Or if I'm in a text messaging conversation that is no longer productive, I might say, okay, end of conversation, right? So I'm not really talking about those circumstances. What I'm talking about is instances where someone says, I'll get back with you, and then they just never do. And this is a common one. I'll call you right back, and they just never do, right? Instead, I actually have a very good friend, and we laugh about this, who would often say, she used to in the past, she would say, all right, let me call you right back. And then she'd never call me back, not like a day later or a week later or a month later. Like, it would be, I would have to call her back. And so I came to understand that I would call you back actually means I have to go. And so we had a conversation, and I said, hey, when you do this, at the time I said it's incredibly annoying, but what I now realize is it was really activating. And so I said, if you need to go, just say I need to go. Please stop saying you're going to call me back if you're not going to call me back. And so she laughed. We kind of laughed about it. I mean, we said this in the context of, laughter and banter. We weren't in an argument or in discord at that point. But I did share that with her, and she was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize. So understand that some people don't realize they're doing this, and we have to be able to make them aware. Also, it could be something like, sometimes people are communicating with you, and you're asking a question, or you're in a conversation, and they just completely stop communicating with no warning. And I'm not talking about for an hour or 2 hours. I'm talking about for days, right? There's one thing to withhold communication for, 12 hours, 13 hours. You might be getting busy. You can't, in this age of instant gratification, we cannot expect for people to be responding to text messages instantly or calling people back immediately, as in within an hour in the middle of a workday. We can expect within a 24-hour period a response, generally speaking. And so when a person does not respond for days or weeks, that is something that for the person who is waiting on the response can be activating. And so I just think that there's an awareness that needs to be raised around this. And what can we do as people who either are on either side, as people who are on the side of, yes, I'm that person that can sometimes fade away, or I'm that person that can look at a text message and say, I mean to respond to that, and then get busy. And again, accidentally go a couple of days without responding to a question or a message. And I will admit, like, I myself have been that person, not generally weeks, but it could be a day or 2 days or 3 days. And I look and say, oh my God, I never responded to this text message. And then what do we do in those instances? I will typically say, oh my gosh, I realized I never responded to this text message. I apologize. Here's the response, right? So we can acknowledge the gap in communication, maybe offer what happened, not as an excuse, but just as a place for closure, and then respond. So that's one way that we could do it. And then the people who are on the receiving end, what can we do? So in an instance where I have been the person where I've asked a question or I've reached out or I'm checking in and there's absolutely no response, not even, I'm still thinking about it, I'll get back with you. It's just a blanket silence. What can I do? One of the things that I sometimes do is say, hey, I'm actually concerned. I've you hadn't responded to me and I just want to make sure that you're okay. And so that's kind of a way to help the person who has withdrawn their communication kind of get, oh, let me just say, yep, I'm alive. you know, all is well. I just got busy. And then for those people who are listening who may just be non responders altogether, especially if you're in a situation where you need to set a boundary or you need to complete a communication, meaning complete as in like we're done, or complete a relationship, there is a case for learning the language for how to do that. Now that might be an entirely new podcast, but one thing I might suggest is just to say, hey, I need some time and space, or hey, I don't think this relationship is working out, or hey, no, I've decided to not pursue this opportunity with you, and trust that the person on the receiving end can handle it, are full grown adults. When we do not communicate our boundaries for fear of hurting someone's feelings or for fear of that discomfort, causing them discomfort or even ourselves discomfort, we are not giving people the grace, we're not giving them the respect of you're a full grown adult and I know that you can handle this, right? So I think that for those people who are conflict avoidant and thus they ghost people out of the avoidance of conflict, one learning edge or growth edge for you would be to practice those boundaries, practice those separation conversations, those completion conversations. And that's a lot of what I do as a coach, is teach people the language and how to, like, you know, acknowledge what's going on in the body when there's discomfort, but actually take the action anyway. Because at the end of the day, that builds a muscle for you in communication and builds an empowerment for you to be able to set those boundaries in multiple situations. So I'll leave you with that. Some tools for those who are on the receiving end of silence in communication, some tools for those who are on the perpetuating end and you realize it and you want to mend the harm, and then for those, or mend the fences, right, and restore the integrity. And for those who are just are, you know, you're an avoider of conversations and you do it out of fear of conflict, those three things. And just understanding that silence is communication and it is incredibly activating for some, those who have had it weaponized against them, and to be aware of that if you're one of those people that tend to just fade away into the horizon when you feel like the communication, you're complete with the communication. All right. And so with that, I am going to leave you to practice these things and let me know what your thoughts are. Again, thank you so much for listening. Without you, there's no podcast. And just remember to subscribe and share this episode. Share it with a friend, share it with a colleague, share it with a family member, because we certainly need for people to understand how our communication is impacting others. And so share this episode and please leave a review if you found this valuable. And until the next time we see each other, stay empowered.